The David Bohm Society presents.
Perhaps I'll proceed a little now and explain, go on with what I was going to say, because I think it all ties up. You see that we're saying now about participation. Now, you see, if we come back to this question of thought, we've discussed various kinds of thought at a deeper level. And you see, one important point about thought is that thought is an abstraction, is always abstraction, you see. See, literal thought might have claimed eventually not to be abstraction, but to be just a faithful copy of what is. But every thought is an abstraction, you see. Now, that's the first thing we have to notice, that abstract means literally to take out. It takes out from the concrete context of the actual perception and experience. Something is abstracted. Now, it's clear that whatever you think about, it cannot cover everything that would be in the thing, right? There's always more, right? And it's always somewhat different. There's always surprises, huh? That you don't have everything in thought, right? You see, the thought clearly is an abstraction. The thought of this rose lacks many of the qualities, most of the qualities of the rose. It has some of them, at least in some similarity, right? Now, so thought is an abstraction, and literal thought has this problem in it that implicitly it's trying to say that it's seeking the ideal of not being an abstraction, but just being another copy of what is, right? Not taking out anything, not leaving out anything, right? So I think you can see that yes, there's always more, and we could say, therefore, by means of thought, we could not capture the whole, right? That's what I'm suggesting. We can always get more. You see, there's no limit to thought which you can set, because people could always discover more. Scientists could discover more and more and more. But it's always limited. It's limited because it doesn't get all, right? The word limit means the same as boundary, finite. See, the word finite is just Latin for limit. Finish is the same root. You know, definite means the same thing. Definition, to define, to set the limits, right? And something which is infinite has no limits, right? Now, there are several kinds of infinite. You see, there are several kinds of limits. You see, there's the quantitative limit, the size of it, right? Or else the number of degrees or the number of whatever. There's the qualitative limit. You see that everything is limited by its qualities. In order to be what it is, it can't be something else. You see a rock cannot be a tree, right? And a goat cannot be a sheep, and so on, you know, all the way around, right? So therefore, we have qualitative limits, and everything is defined. And then besides that, everything has limited capacity to take its action, right? Everything can do something, but it can only do some limited thing, right? It can't do everything. So you have all those limits, and now those limits are represented by categories, you see. We say the sheep are in one category. You put everything together which belongs together and call it sheep, or call it rock, or call it whatever, and then something else, as the goats, are put in another category, right? And, therefore, thought works by categories and gives a name to each category. And then categories are put together into more general categories, and so on, into animals, and so on, all the way up. The most general category, a very general one, might be matter as a whole, right? Now, which physics deals with, right? Or energy. There's this kind of energy, that kind of energy, that kind of energy, and then there's energy, right? Now every category implies a limit. Every name implies a limit, right? And we're saying that thought determines limits. It's an abstraction, you see. It's something limited, but even that limit is an abstraction. Like, for example, the limit between two fields is a line. but it's an abstraction. See, the fields really are one, right? We have set it. We may draw a dotted line on a map and say that's the limit of the country, but you see, there is no. Right? You know that even when we say this chair is limited, it's an abstraction because at the atomic level it sort of shades into the air, into the surroundings. You know, so at the level at which we're working, that abstraction is okay, right? But it's adequate. So we've got everything limited that way, and we have everything in categories, right? And thought works that way. Now, that means that whatever we think anything is, it isn't, right? It can't be. So the thought, however, may guide our action. It may constitute a guide or a map of some sort, right? If it's correct. Now, all of these things are relevant when we're talking about the thoughts we're talking about. What about, what were we, whether we can do all sorts of things. You see, what is the thing biological? Is it psychological? Right? The two are concepts. Biological is one, psychological is another. They're both thoughts, right? You cannot find the biological by looking for it. I mean, it doesn't exist, right? Not as a concrete thing. Nor does the psychological. They're both abstractions. The limits between them are abstractions. Yes, thought cannot do other than make abstractions. It's simply because thought makes them. The process of thought works by making abstractions. You see, now these abstractions are then organized to give rise to concepts, right? Yes, and it was necessary. You see, even the animal does that, right? The animal can select things that are similar, the food that it needs, and distinguish them from things that are different, right? So that distinction arises at a deeper level than thought. It is still a kind of abstraction, even when the animal does it. But the human being carries it further into concepts and names, and for the sake of communication, and to organize it into much more complex structures, right? And to hold it. See, the animal cannot hold an abstract category in its mind, right? It can't remember sufficiently, such a thing. So you can begin to see how thought would develop. You see, thought is a part of existence, right? It's going on electrically and chemically, and it's not people used to think maybe it was totally spiritual or not, but we now know at least it must have a very important component that is material, right? Well, yes, because thought is occupying a central part in our structure. You see, now you see, thought can produce something similar to perception. The experience similar to perception, but different. It will produce imagination, for example. We'll go into that later. And it can sort of stir up everything in the way it also is connected with felt and with physical movements and so on. By thinking, you can decide to carry out a physical movement. So there must be a connection between thought and your physical movement, right? It must be possible for thought to, whatever nerves are required to get your muscles moving, thought must find a way of getting them to fire, right? It's actually doing that physically. And Eccles, a man called Eccles, has shown that when you have an intention to do something, you may be conscious of the intention at a certain stage, but before you are conscious of it, electrical activity is recorded for a short period of a fraction of a second before you are conscious of it. So as you're forming an intention, something is happening in the brain that you're not yet conscious of, right? I might call that the implicate order or something, you see. But, so that your intention to act it cannot be separated from the physical, right? And and all of that is thought. Now, see, let's talk around this a while. That the thought not only forms abstractions, and forms higher and higher levels of abstractions. More general, it organizes them, but it forms a concept. You see, now the word concept has the root, and there's another word, percept. You see, perception. They both have the same root. The same root as the word capture, right? To take hold of. Now, perception, to perceive is to capture it thoroughly, according to the Latin rule. To conceive is to capture, to take hold of it all together. The concept tries to grasp some kind of whole, right? So thought gets organized into concepts, which also, however, are still limited, right? Now, they're still abstractions. You can get some interesting, so I could give two examples of how a concept is formed. You see, there's the well-known case of Helen Keller, who was blind and deaf at a very early age, so that she didn't learn to talk, and she couldn't communicate. Now, this teacher, Anne Sullivan, found a way, which was to play a game with this child, constantly putting the child in contact with various things and scratching the name on the palm of the hand, right? Now, for a long time, the child didn't see the point of that game, you see. But she was picking it up, nevertheless, what was going on. Now, then, see, suddenly, one day she was exposed to water. Perhaps it was in a pail, standing still in a pail in the morning, or a little bit later, she was exposed to running water. The same name was scratched, you see. And then she suddenly had an insight, you see, which was that everything has a name. Now, as soon as she had that insight, everything changed. She was able to learn language, make sentences in a short time, and to communicate. Right? Now, whereas before she had been, as it was said, like a wild animal. Now, there was a tremendous difference. And you see, this insight that everything has a name, she had before she had the word name, right? It was a nonverbal insight about the word, right? Now, and there was a further point. See, she could have seen this by saying, not only does it hold for water, that the same name was scratched, the same feelings were on her hand, water in the pump and water running. The experience of that is apparently very different, right? If you don't know anything about it. And she was wondering, why should such different things have the same, why was this woman scratching the same thing for two such different experiences, right? That was, you see, that was the puzzle, right? That's the way insight arises, to see something that's very puzzling, something not making sense. And then suddenly it made sense, because it was all one substance, water. I mean, with the name, as she saw it was all water, that there were two forms of water, and with room for any number of forms of water, right? She could keep on adding to that concept according to experience, right? And to talking and communicating. She could be told about it and so on. So you could begin to build up the concept of water, but it was a much bigger revolution, because she had the concept of the concept. That is, she had the source of it, right? That she saw that it was possible to do this for anything, which clearly was due to the fact that this game had been played for several weeks, or whatever it was. And she could see that it was all the same, right? That therefore, not merely water, but everything could be done that way. See, so that was something very general, an insight, and you can see that insight is a nonverbal activity which transformed her life, right? Now, we now say maybe we're too much in concepts and we should get out of it. We may need another insight. But see, if we didn't get into concepts, we would never have been able to raise these questions at all. I mean, if we had stayed at the level she was, we probably couldn't survive, right? So the...
Are you saying that we can arrive at an insight through concept? Is that how
I'm saying no, she didn't have... The insight was into the concept, right? She didn't know about... She had a kind of concept. She probably had concepts, but none which had names, right? Right? Now, the
perception of water on a non-verbal basis was still the same.
Yes, well, but she didn't know about water. You see, it's very important that she didn't know that running water was the same as standing water. We can tell that with our eyes by watching how running water becomes standing water, right? But she could never do that.
But I mean, tactilely.
No, but it would be almost impossible, you see. How do you see running water turning into standing water, or vice versa, you see? It's because now it was entirely due to the name being scratched that she could see that they are the same, different forms of the same thing, right? Now, although
she did have prior experience with both forms of water.
She had, but she didn't know they were water. You see, she said, these are two different things. You know, I don't know. You know, she had no way of knowing they were the same thing. You see, now the concept brings together all the things that belong together, you see. And that distinguished it from other things which belong apart, because the minute she knew she could make other concepts like a tree or, you know, or a house or something, you know, or whatever, teacher, which are not water, right? So therefore, it became possible to bring a new order into her life and organize it and to communicate. You see, because she had the name, she could communicate it, right? Now, the name has a tremendous and powerful effect, you see. Without the name, it would never have worked. Well, she may have conceptualized before on the basis of some experience, but she could never attach a name to it. Now, see, notice that was done by abstraction, you see, because the difference of running and standing water is an abstraction, right? And the fact that you put them together, you know, or keep certain things apart or put things together, it's entirely at the level of abstraction. And it was through the name that you can call it up again, right? And add to it and change it and so on, develop it, connect it to other concepts, you see, and begin the process of thinking, you see, in an organized way, which was communicable, and so that you could then pick up other people's thoughts, and you could begin to engage in the whole process. And she became quite good at it and went to the university and did all sorts of things which, you know, people can do, you see, once they pick this up, right? Now, well, if you can get a feeling for it, you see, can you put yourself in her place, use the imagination, right?
Yeah.
And say, okay, you can't see anything, you can't hear anything, you've never heard of names, right? You don't know what they are. You may have some sort of concepts, but they may be just whatever formed by experience in some accidental way. Like food might be a concept, right? That you could recognize somehow. You would know this is food, right? Because of the similar experience all the time. So that when you're hungry and then you get food, right? Now, but then that's very limited, right? Now then, suppose you were going through this experience of touching all sorts of things, getting different experiences, and having a common experience for certain of those touches, right?
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
See, I'm trying to discuss see, every time we touched this object, there was a different, it feels different as you touch it in different places, right? But the same scratch is on there. Well, there was, but she didn't see it. You know, she didn't see the point of it at all. No, the insight was first. But I said it was an insight into concepts. That there is such a thing as a concept with a name, right?
Okay, I've got you.
You see, that's not, you see, in other words, given her lack of experience and her lack of communication, most children pick this up very quickly, you see, because there's so many ways of communicating it, but given her particular background, she didn't know this, right? and giving them the same name. You see, now, if you have vision, you could make such a concept without having a name, because you see other similarities. For example, you can see the form looks similar, or you can see this running water slows down and becomes standing water. You see, with the aid of vision, quite a few concepts could form, but you couldn't communicate them, right? Now, except in a very limited way, right? Now, so the point is that there you have an example of insight. And you see, which changed her life. And she might not have survived if she hadn't had that insight. Right? So now, I can't describe the insight, but you can try to put yourself in her place and see what it might have felt like. Right? Yes, in language, in acquiring any language, you have to go through something like that, and suddenly you understand it. You see that, but this was a far more difficult thing, you see. And but thinking takes part in it. You see that, for example, the teacher was doing some very good thinking, although it may have been intuitive. Right? She didn't say it in words, but she must have sensed that this was the key problem. You see, in other words, why did she scratch the name? You see, in other words, that therefore there was some very, in order to communicate this point, some very clear thinking some very good thinking had to take place. Right? Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, in other words, if you find that something is happening that doesn't fit the scheme of things, then that scheme stops operating. Yeah, but the world is full of things that don't fit the scheme, you see. And we're always encountering it. Yeah, that's our trouble. That's our trouble. Yes. If we were free to notice that they're not fitting, then we would have the insight. Well, not even that. We're rejecting the evidence that it is not fitting. You see, it's not the conceptualization that stops. That may be just one of the tricks by which we avoid looking at the fact that it doesn't fit. You see, if suppose you say, look, you may get some evidence that your prejudices are not right, huh? But you don't want to take that seriously. Right? So you could say, well, only it's true some people of that group are okay, but the rest are not. Right? You start to conceptualize to explain it away. You can explain the evidence away by conceptualizing it, right, in a certain way. But it's not because it's a concept that it's wrong. It's because your deep intention is not to pay any attention to the evidence, right? Because you want to defend whatever is there. Yeah, well, that's a very subtle and complex question. You see, like children say, sticks and stones can break my bones, but names can never hurt me. But in fact, people are hurt by names. You see, so it isn't clear. You see, something is going wrong. Now, the thing that you have just called attention to is that the self is a concept. I mean, that the name, if the name is taken that seriously, that I'm really stealing my name, you hurt me. Therefore, it must be the concept that is hurt. Well, we may have to. I'll look at it the other way. We've got some concepts implicit concepts which are in the way. So we're trying to bring them out, right? That's the first step. And we may contrast them with other concepts which are better, but the insight goes beyond the concept, right?
We need to do this primary work first.
Yeah. We've got to let these concepts be seen, because otherwise they are implicit and they work, and no matter what our intentions are, they're going to work the same, right? You may say, I realize how silly it is to be hurt by name calling, right? No, it's the silliest thing in the world, but if somebody calls me a name, it'll still be hurt, right? It won't change it, huh? You see, so that doesn't prove it's right to respond that way, but it shows we have to understand that there's something going on there that we have to bring out.
Important to see this aspect, because that's the nature of the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. See, being hurt by name is extremely silly, but wars have been fought over it, right? Duels have been fought over, everything, and people have really become enemies.
I get hurt.
Yes, but why should I take it that seriously? You see, if it's only a name and a concept, I mean, why should it bother me? You see, a concept is an abstraction.
It's out. If you kick me, you've hurt me. But
That's exactly what this children's rhyme says.
If you call me a name, I'm hurting myself.
That's true. Well, it's the concept that's hurting you. You see, you're not doing it intentionally, but the concept is working. You see, it's like a piece of machinery inside. Just as your liver works, your concepts work. I'm not saying concepts are good or bad. We're trying to just look at them. They're necessary. They have all sorts of good points, and we couldn't live without them, but they can cause us a lot of trouble, right?
Are you saying concepts are a group of thoughts?
Well, they're organized thoughts, you see, but they're organized around the name, right? At least the kind we're talking about. Or a symbol in general. You could have a cross or a figure, anything that's recognizable can stand for the name, right? Now, but if we put the name as a word, we can communicate it by talking. Otherwise, we might communicate it by writing or by drawing figures or by gestures or in various other ways. See, a gesture could become the name, right? Now, you see, the name is crucial because the name calls up the concept, right? And also the concept calls up the name, and the name communicates the concept. You see, it makes it possible for us to communicate, because all that I'm saying is words which communicate concepts to you, right? Now, these concepts, if we stop there, they're empty, you see, but they have a meaning. The meaning we've got to see, which is behind it, right? Which may be greater. But these concepts are abstraction, right? But somehow there's a meaning, we're saying, behind it, right? Now, literal thought would just stick with the concept, saying the concepts are all that we're communicating, and the thing in reality is just the same as the concept, right? That's literal thought. Now, we have poetic thought, which is much more ambiguous. It doesn't have a sharply defined concept, right? And then we have this participatory thought, in which concepts play a different role. that really the actual participation, the concept of the occasion for starting some participation. That's all different kinds of thought, you see. And now, you see, we have to be careful not to condemn concepts per se, because we couldn't do anything without them. In the same way we can't condemn memory, we would be idiots without, we would not be able to have one connected action without them, without memory, you see. So, but something is going wrong with concepts, as it is going wrong with memory, as it is going wrong with emotions, and so on. It's all one process. That concepts are being used for self-deception. They're being used to cover up things, instead of being used properly.
Is it that the concepts are wrong, or they're being used wrong?
They're being used wrongly, and some of them are wrong themselves, but in addition, the main point is they're being used wrongly.
They're being confused with what's real.
Yes, that's literal thought.
And if the concept is used for what's real, it's never going to work.
Yes, because concept is an abstraction.
It's limited.
It's limited, right.
The thought being all wrapped up in literal thought, being wrapped up in itself like that, it doesn't even have any relationship with what's quote real.
Well, not fundamentally. You see, in a certain area, we can make thought that's fairly literal in the technical area. But it's not absolutely so, because none of our machines are exactly what we think they are, right? They break down, you see. They don't do what they're supposed to do. They have little faults in them. Anyway, they have an atomic structure which we don't know about, and they have all sorts of things, you see. But, so that's an abstraction, you see.
So we have confused that abstraction for reality.
Yes, because of literal thought, right? The same thing, right?
So literal thought can convince us to see a picture of forest and take it as a forest, and almost smell the perfume of the pine trees.
As what?
And it may have the power of the literal thought to convince us that a picture of forest is a real forest.
Yes, so that picture contains everything significant that the forest contains, right?
Has the power to deceive.
Yes, well, it has the power, the power to deceive is deeper. I mean, that will not go without the intention to deceive, you see. That this concept by itself doesn't necessarily deceive. There's a deeper intention to engage in self-deception in order to defend something, you see. So therefore we can say now, we say thought can be organized into concepts and produce tremendous concepts like time and space and physical concepts, relativity theory, quantum theory, all these concepts, right? The structures of concepts. And they have great power, you see, when they're used properly. And they produce the concept of the self, the concept of the country, the concept of everything, you see. But we don't see this happening. You see, we don't. This is what we'll perhaps try to look at the next hour. We don't see how it comes about that we're fooled by these concepts, and why these names hurt us is just even more than sticks and stones, right? We don't see why this happens. Huh? You see, it's rather silly. We all agree that names shouldn't matter that much, but names are the names of concepts. You see, whatever they call you in the name, there's a concept in it, isn't there? It's not just the word. And and that concept hurts, you see. Now, apparently it has a solidity and a reality and a power, which in some way must be false, you see, because it's only an abstraction. Right? If we don't get that straight, then see, that's getting close to the core of the problem, right? That we can't see what would be meant by reality or by anything. The process is not reliable, you see. We can get caught up in concepts mistaken for reality very quickly.
Thinking is playing false rather than playing true.
Yes, that's right. Yes, it's playing false, you see.
Isn't that pretty much where we're at?
Well, that's where the trouble. See, I tried to say that yesterday night. You see that we have this mess going on, and that's it, right? You see, nationalism is a concept, right? It's you see, since this last war, a lot of nations have been created. They never existed before, right? They were clearly created as concepts, right? Now, since then, they seem very solid and real. People fight over them and die over them and argue. You know, the boundaries are very sharp, and so on.
Well, we mistake the word for the thing. So when we say my country, right along with my country, what are we saying is real?
Well, I don't know. You see, that's what we have to look to ourselves. Myself, right or wrong, is the same thing. You see, people say me first, right? But what is meant by that? You say number one comes first. You see, the point is, what does it mean? What does me mean? That's what we have to go into.
Does it have to do with value?
It has to do with value because me has a supreme value, or my country, or whatever, right?
That changes this concept into something more than just the concept.
Well, the concept always has value and it affects us, or see. But this has a tremendously high value, which has a very big effect. Right?
You attack my words, you attack my values, and I'll slug you.
Yeah, but it doesn't make sense. You see, I'm trying to say we really have got to get deeper and say we can't accept this really inevitable, but saying question it. What is behind it? You see.
I think to realize that it's really wrong, what you're talking about, in essence, the deep root of it, to see that it's wrong, it's already changed its
Well,
nature.
we have begun to change its nature, but it will easily slip back if we don't go deeper, you see. Now, somebody can say, I see how wrong it is to be affected by names, but somebody will say an insulting name and he'll still be affected, you see. It has to go deeper.
Humanity's caliber. Goebbels said if you repeat a lie often enough, you believe it yourself. People accept lies.
Yes, so that's part of the whole thing, that the concept becomes reality, you see. That is, the lie is a certain concept, right?
Well, it was pointed out earlier that might have something to do with the identification of the self with the name entity.
Yes, it's all beginning to point to that, you see. But it's important to notice the power of the name. You see, even though we know it shouldn't have that power, but still it's got it.
Well, as long as the category of the self contains certain qualities, whatever challenges that is obviously implicitly going to affect that category.
Yes, well,
I mean, it's automatic.
yes, well, if there's the category of the self and the concept of the self, and somebody says something that takes away another concept which takes away the value of it, then there's going to be a powerful reaction. You see, if somebody says, the concept of the self, maybe I'm very wise and capable and can do everything right, and somebody says that's all wrong, you're an idiot, right? That's a different concept, right? There are two concepts which don't agree, right? That concept will upset the whole system that you had there, which was producing a nice neurochemical state all over the body, and therefore it disturbs the whole body, right?
Even the thing that relaxes even the thing that responds is another concept.
Yes.
Concepts on top of concepts.
Well, it keeps moving, you see. The concepts are not working properly, right?
So are you trying to create a new concept by what we're talking about?
No, we're just looking at it, you see. I'm trying to say we're sort of digging into the thought process and trying to get a feeling for how it works, right?
The feeling I'm getting is that our individual perception of reality is all based on our individual conceptualization of what is.
Yeah, but this, most of our individual conceptualizations are collective. You see, that's the second point. And that's what we'll discuss in the next hour. You see, we have the concept that they're individual, but it's a wrong concept of it.
Well, if there's a collision of concepts in the mind, shouldn't it be handled in the mind instead of on the battlefield? Is that part of it?
Yes, because concepts have power. Concepts with high value have power, right?
Yeah.
And if they collide, then a tremendous amount of power is released in a conflict. Huh?
At this point,
Maybe that thought has invented the high value, the empowerment.
It has, you see, that's part of the memory too. I mean, it builds up collectively that such and such is important, right?
And then people come with know the level now, that they are spiritual, for instance.
Why?
It's a phenomenon of the New Age specifically, that people come, convince themselves that they are spiritual, so they put that level, and it's a tremendous power that you look at them, and this has empowered the whole organism.
Yes, it's power, and the point is that, see, you have a subculture, you have the whole culture, and then there are subcultures. Now, the New Age is the subculture of the whole culture. There are other people, other subcultures who don't like the New Age at all, right? And vice versa. So, but they share a common base, you know, deeper. Now, the New Age subculture develops certain values with their concepts, right? They not only develop concepts about things, but they develop values, right? And they share them and build them up. And every person there is now a representative of that subculture. You see, and when those values are questioned or attacked, he feels personally his whole being is attacked, right? You see, and the same holds with nationalism and with religion and so on, you see, and with a lot of other things. Also with the concept of the self and its excellence and so on.
now, in this inquiry, as it goes along, it's sort of like a knife cutting through things. And as long as it's cutting through what seem to be simply mental constructions, we're very fond of it. But then, when it begins to cut the flesh, which is to say our concept experiences reality, we tend to shy away from that knife.
Yeah, that's only natural because, you see, if the body is attacked, it will demand getting either fighting back or getting away, right? So that response is carried over into the thought process to, see, the body feels very disturbed, and the thought process may say, we've got to stop this disturbance of the body, so we'll try to run away, change the concept to another one, or which is less disturbing, right? Saying, no, I'm not an idiot, it's those people who are idiotic, you see. They don't really understand what I'm up to, and and so on. You see that the concept is manipulated to make the body feel more comfortable, right?
Is the inquiry really moving until the inquiry begins to...
Well, it's moving on one level, and then it's got to move into another level, right? You see, I think there's so much confusion at this simple level of words and concepts. We've got to clear that up to be able to communicate, you see. That our ordinary words and concepts don't communicate this at all, you see, unless we dig into them, right? You see, if we just went to anybody on the street and started talking about this, they would say, you're crazy, right? Because the words needed to do this have not been built up, you see. With them.
It's easy to sit in this room and entertain this, but to wake up in the middle of the night and realize the implications of it, that's the time that your intention either holds and you go through all the pain and the feeling and the letting go, or that's the end of the end.
Yes, well, it may not be the end, but at least it's like you've fallen off for the time being, right? What? Yeah, you've got to get back on, but we'll come to that, why the concept has that power. We've sort of indicated already in terms of values, but it's a much subtler question, I think, than that. And because that's really at the core of the self. You see, this notion of the self, which is not making sense, right? That it's not, and also the country and the religion and all those other things. Now, I think maybe if we're going to have a break, we'd better have it now, and perhaps make it very short, right? Not more than 10 minutes. Right?
dbohm.com